Hello and welcome to UFO Narrative. I'm your host, Tony G. Hey, for those of you who have subscribed, thank you so very much. For those of you who haven't, please subscribe or give us a like. Both would be great. We're trying to grow the channel here because I think this is one of the most fascinating topics. So what are we looking at this particular episode? Well, we're looking at something called the lights over Phoenix. On March 13th, 1997, people of the American Southwest witnessed a configuration of lights, or several configurations of lights that appeared over the Phoenix area. They were amazed, astonished, scared, awestruck, everything, that you can imagine. Whatever it was that occurred over the skies of the American Southwest traveled hundreds of miles from 7:30 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. and traversed several states. It wasn't just Arizona that this occurred in. This became known as the lights over Phoenix, or the Phoenix lights, because the majority of the activity occurred in Arizona. So here's a map of the state of Arizona. As you can see, it kind of cut across the state diagonally, whatever this was, this sequence of lights. So what exactly happened that night? Technically, there were not one, but two and possibly more events that occurred having to do with these mysterious lights. What is less well known is that they also appeared over California, Nevada, and Mexico. We know this because around sunset, a man in Henderson, Nevada, reported seeing a large boomerang or V-shaped object with lights underneath it hovering in the desert near his home. As he observed this object, it began to move. Shortly thereafter, about 20 minutes, the police received a second report from a retired police officer who saw the very same object traveling along the road. Well, he got in his car and he followed it. He kept about a mile distance between himself and this object until he got a little closer and he recognized how large this thing was. So he reported the same thing, a large boomerang or V-shaped object with amber lights underneath it, traveling fairly slowly across the desert. At about 8:20 p.m., reports started pouring in from Prescott Valley in Arizona about the same thing, traveling very slowly and very low over people's houses. Now, this continued, of course, over Phoenix, or the Phoenix area, and then further down to Tucson, and then further into Mexico. Now, in order to keep this episode at a watchable length, we're going to focus on two specific events. The first event concerning this V-shaped or boomerang-shaped object that cut across Nevada, Arizona, and Mexico, and then the more static object that appeared over Phoenix, the lights over Phoenix. First, we'll take a look at what the Air Force and the Department of Defense had to say concerning the explanation for these sightings. Then we're going to take a look at eyewitness testimony from the Phoenix area. And then we're going to look at the political fallout from this, and it is something else, man. Where do you see the stuff? And then I'm going to reveal to you what I saw, not on the night of March 13th, but a year later, along with one of my daughters. And now let's take a look at the Department of Defense and the Air Force's explanation for the lights over Phoenix. I think you'll find it interesting to note that the Air Force and the Department of Defense did not offer an explanation for these objects, lights, whatever they were, until July of 1997, 4 months later. Why? Well, because Captain Eileen Benz of the Army National Guard decided that she had had enough of the calls concerning UFOs, and she wanted to launch an investigation to find out what was going on here, right? Makes perfect sense. What she found was that there were no military aircraft flying on the night of March 13th from Arizona. But there were military aircraft from another state. We'll get to that in a minute. Now, to the chagrin of those who had witnessed these lights and wanted an explanation, well, the Air Force and Department of Defense told us that they were flares. Here's the headline. These flares were dropped by a formation of A-10 Thunderbolt II aircraft from the Maryland Air National Guard during training exercises from nearby Barry M. Goldwater Air Force Test Range in southwest Arizona. Here's the Barry M. Goldwater Test Range in relation to Phoenix. Now, this was part of a larger military exercise called Operation Snowbird. Now, why the term snowbird? Well, because the planes were from Maryland, where it snows. And in Arizona, it's kind of a derogatory thing. They call people snowbirds who come into Arizona during the winter and they get the hell out before the heat hits. And trust me, I lived there for 20 years. It gets really, really hot. Now, military flares were used in Operation Snowbird to illuminate the ground. Well, why do they do that? Well, because if you're a soldier and you're training for battle at night, right, and you can't see the enemy, well, what are you going to do? Well, they drop flares to illuminate the ground so that you can see your enemy. Now, these flares have parachutes attached to them, and they do leave smoke trails as they descend. Here's an image of the flares, and here's the A-10 Thunderbolt II plane that dropped the flares, and here's how it looks when the flares are dropped from the plane. According to experts, the flares would have been seen in Phoenix and would have seemed to have blinked out as they fell behind the Estrella mountain range, okay, and the Estrella Mountains, which is between Phoenix and the Barry M. Goldwater test range. So here's the Estrella Mountains, okay, beautiful, and here's a map showing you where the Estrella Mountains are in relation to the Phoenix area, and this image shows you the approximate location of the flare dropping and the Estrella Mountains and the Phoenix area. So you can see if the flares were dropped behind the mountain in the sky, as they fell, they would begin to disappear behind the mountain if you were in Phoenix observing them. Now, ironically, Dr. Lynn Katai, who is very famous for her video footage she took of these lights over Phoenix, we're going to get to that shortly, she produced a documentary concerning the lights over Phoenix. And it's a fascinating video that I strongly recommend you watch because it has lots of eyewitness testimony in it. What we find out in this video is that research was done via the native peoples that live there, the Hopi and the Zuni tribes. And those folks have been seeing lights over the Estrella Mountains for hundreds of years. Now, interestingly, the Estrella Mountains, Estrella is a Spanish word that means star. And these lights to the Zuni and the Hopi people are known as the star people, right? They believe it is a gateway to another world or another universe. Very similar to Skinwalker Ranch. For those of you who have watched Skinwalker Ranch, which I find to be an incredibly fascinating show, definitely check it out if you haven't checked it out yet, where we're talking about gateways or wormholes and things like that to other dimensions. Well, the Hopi and the Zuni people have been talking about this for hundreds of years. Now, the star people, they claim, are a benevolent race of people who come from the Pleiades, which is a star cluster in the constellation of Taurus. Now, I think it's important that we take a look at what these slow-burning, slow-falling flares look like in operation. And then we'll compare them with the photographs of the lights over Phoenix. So here's a photo of military flares. And here are the properties of these flares. Some of them we touched on. They burn magnesium, which creates a bright white light. They have parachutes attached to them, as you can see. They leave illuminated smoke trails. They burn for a maximum of 5 minutes. They fall vertically, and they are released sequentially. Now, here's a video of them from a distance. Not a great video, but it's a video nonetheless. Gives you a sense of what they look like. With that in mind, let's take a look at a frame from Dr. Katai's camcorder video of the lights over Phoenix. There they are. Now, the next image was taken with a camera, and you can see that the lights, the configuration of lights, is very different from the lights over Phoenix. Very different. This was taken from the suburbs of Phoenix. So I'll ask you, after seeing how these military flares look, do you think that the lights over Phoenix were flares? I'm just going to ask you that question. And you can leave me an answer in the comment section. Please do. Now let's compare the properties of the flares that we looked at with these images. Flares burn magnesium and therefore emit a bright white light to illuminate the ground. These do not appear to do that. They are amber in color and they do not illuminate the ground. These lights do not appear to have parachutes attached to them either. These lights do not appear to be leaving smoke trails. We know that the lights people witnessed traveled great distances for several hours and remained lit. Although these are still images, these lights do not appear to be falling vertically or out of sequence. Instead, they form a very specific formation of lights. So although these flares may be an accurate explanation of what we're seeing, what people saw, and they may not, depending on your point of view, what about northern Arizona, Nevada, and Tucson, the Tucson area. Well, northern Arizona and Nevada, there really is no explanation given for those two places. However, for Tucson, there is. The explanation offered for the lights over Tucson were that this was a training exercise for pilots learning how to fly these planes at night. And that was from the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, and here's a picture of it over in Tucson. This training exercise was also part of the aforementioned Operation Snowbird. So now that we've heard the official explanation for the lights over Phoenix and the lights over Tucson, right, let's take a look at eyewitness testimony. And what you're going to find is a completely different explanation for the lights over Phoenix. Well, those of you on the fence and skeptics, you may want to hold on to your hats here, because you're going to hear some stuff that's really going to test your tolerance for this kind of thing. Some of these witness reports are absolutely astonishing, okay? So be prepared. Now, speaking of witnesses, air traffic controllers at Sky Harbor Airport actually saw the lights, and you can see here's the tower, and in the distance is the city of Phoenix. So they had a perfect vantage point of these lights over Phoenix. However, the lights didn't show up on radar, which was the weird thing. So pilots would call in and say, hey, there are these lights, what's going on? And the air traffic controllers would say, we have no idea what they are. And in fact, they're not showing up on radar. So be careful, kind of a thing. In fact, a Southwest Airlines pilot had radioed in to the tower and said, this thing is so big, I think I could land on it. So there's some really incredible stuff here. So the firemen, police officers, pilots, air traffic controllers who witnessed this claim that these were not individual lights, but were part of a large craft, okay? Now that's some people. Some people saw that, and some people saw something else, all right? So we're gonna get into that in a moment. Many witnesses claimed that the lights were flying so low that this craft, we'll call it a craft at this point, was flying so low that they were about 30 to 100 feet above them, or above their homes. One of the more notable witnesses, a man named David Parker, was a hospice nurse. He's on his way home, and he has to go up this huge ramp. The ramp, the height of it, puts him where the streetlights will level with the tires of his car below. Okay, so he's level with streetlights, so he's already about 30 feet off the ground. Okay. He stops his truck, and I'm going to read to you what happens at this point. I saw a massive boomerang-shaped object with lights on the bottom coming towards me, so I slammed on my brakes and jumped out of my truck. Because I was at such an elevated level as the craft came upon me, I could clearly see the bottom of it. It was a mile wide from tip to tip. It was gunmetal gray with no seams and no bolts. On the bottom were thousands of oval indentations, kind of like thumbprints, going lengthwise. The nearest light that was close to me was kind of like a canister, and I could see a little ways up inside the canister and probably a few inches inside. There was a silver lining on the inside, and what was flowing down, it looked exactly like lava. It was like a very thick, viscous liquid. It poured down, and as it got lower and lower from the craft, it slowed down and formed like a huge drop, then stopped, and then went back up into the craft. There were probably 8, 9, or 10 big streams of it, and instead of being sucked back up into the craft, it looked like it fell upwards into the craft. This stuff actually glowed itself. I was afraid I was going to get burned. I was so close. It looked so hot, but there was no heat. Really odd. It had no heat, made no sound, and had no odor. It was effortlessly floating by. Now, conversely, there were witnesses who described these lights as individual craft, and one of them is a famous actor, Kurt Russell. Now, Kurt Russell is also a pilot. In a BBC interview, he revealed what happened to him that evening. He was flying in to the Phoenix area at precisely the right time when he saw the lights over Phoenix. Now, not the boomerang-shaped craft, apparently, but he saw 6 individual lights, right, over the city. And that would be more like Dr. Kitai's video. But he maintained these were 6 individual craft. He radioed into the tower, and he said, I see these lights over the city. What's going on? The tower said, yeah, we see them too, not on radar. And he says, well, I guess they're UFOs. And they kind of chuckled, yeah, we guess so. So he maintains to this day that they were 6 individual craft that he saw. All right, and he was up there looking at them. So what I think is going on here is, as I said earlier, there may have been multiple craft, multiple events, multiple occurrences. All right, people saw different things. Some people saw this boomerang-shaped craft, and some people saw 6 individual craft or lights. So let's leave it at that. That's the only thing that really makes sense to me. So now that we've gotten just a taste of this, and again, I recommend you watch Dr. Kitai's documentary. All right, so now let's take a look at the political fallout, and you are just not going to believe what the ridicule for people that see these things and don't know what they are and just want to know what they are. The political fallout from the lights over Phoenix is perhaps even more bizarre than the lights over Phoenix itself. because human behavior is sometimes shocking, myself included. Anyway, so this has to do with then Councilwoman Frances Emma Barwood. Now, I met Frances Emma Barwood, and I spoke with her for quite some time about this very issue, because at a Phoenix Council meeting after the events of March 13th, she innocently asked, well, if these are military aircraft flying overhead, why are they doing this over our city? She was concerned with safety, right? If these are experimental aircraft, right, why are they flying over our city? And why weren't we notified before the exercises, okay? Not like the ones at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base or at Barry M. Goldwater, right? Those are far away, far away from Phoenix. This is Phoenix proper. All she did was ask a question. After the meeting, one of her associates came to her and said, you shouldn't have asked that question. And she said, why? What's wrong with that question? Just public safety. She says, they don't want to deal with it, they don't want to know about it, and they don't want to bother with it. She's like, well, that's weird. Okay. Well, why do I talk about human behavior? Because she was ridiculed for this. And you're not going to believe this, but someone surreptitiously had business cards made for her that said, Frances Emma Barwood, councilwoman from the planet Xenon, no phone required. Speak into my tinfoil hat, I will hear you. Now the papers had a field day with this, right? The media had a field day with this thing. Now remember, Frances Emma Barwood never suggested that these were extraterrestrial in origin. So she was pigeonholed as a UFO fanatic. It's unbelievable. Those mystery lights over Phoenix, they're on, but nobody's home, okay? Or Barwood, the logical choice of extraterrestrials. In any case, but it didn't end there, all right? Then Governor Fife Symington announced that he found out who was responsible for the lights over Phoenix. So he holds a press conference. Well, during the press conference, he quips, they found who was responsible. Then an aide appears, dressed in an alien costume, and removes the alien head. And Symington said, this goes to show that you guys are entirely too serious. Symington later said that he was just trying to bring levity to a very serious topic, But unfortunately, for those thousands of people who saw these lights, or craft, or whatever they were, right? They were pretty upset about it because they were looking for a real answer. People felt ridiculed. Interestingly, in an interview in 2007 with Fox News 10 at the time, when asked what he saw that evening on March 13th, 1997, here's what he said. Well, I saw a huge craft just kind of coming over Squaw Peak. It was just breathtaking. I'm serious now. It was unquestionably a UFO. Nothing like I've ever seen. I'm a pilot. I've got lots of hours flying. And I'll never forget, I snuck out to see it. And I told Ann what I was doing. That's his wife. I was going up to Squaw Peak to see what everybody was, clamoring about. When I walked in the front door, she looked at me after returning home. She said, oh my God, you look like a ghost. What did you see? And I said, I don't know what I saw, but it was really something, and I'm not going to talk about it. I was in awe. It was absolutely silent and had embedded lights. This thing was coming from the northwest, traveling to the southeast. Now, I put a link to the interview on my YouTube channel page because you have to watch this. It's really incredible. So now let me reveal to you what I witnessed concerning the lights over Phoenix. Now, I didn't see it the night of March 13th. However, my neighbor who worked for the airlines at the time, his name was Ron, I believe, he told me that he was walking his dog and he saw the craft, and he said it was this gigantic thing. And he said it flew over all the houses in the neighborhood, including mine. So I was probably doing UFO research at the time when it flew over the house. Just kidding, but who knows, right? However, I did see it later on. Now, my daughter saw it in September of that year. So a few months later, she was at a football game at her high school, and she sees the craft. She said, "Dad, I saw this thing." And she said it was very far away, but it was so big. From her perspective, it was 3 inches wide. Then, about a year later, in 1998, in September of that year, I believe, we both saw it. I was at a football game with her. She was in the marching band. And after she had finished, she sat back up with me in the stands. We're looking to the east. She goes, "Dad, there it is again." And indeed, we saw it. We saw it cross the horizon. From my vantage point, it was about an inch wide, like something like that wide, but it was extremely recognizable. The sun was going down, and you could see it was the boomerang-shaped craft with the amber lights underneath it, crossing the horizon. We watched it for several minutes, and all the people in the stands, heads were turning, people were getting up, looking, everybody saw it. So there you go. That's my eyewitness account concerning the lights over Phoenix. Whatever flew over California, Nevada, Arizona, and Mexico on March 13th, 1997 was certainly extraordinary, whatever it was. All right, for those of you who saw it and want to leave a comment in the comment section, please do. I'd love to hear from you. For those of you who don't believe in it or believe it was flares, please leave a comment. Love to hear from it. Please subscribe and like. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time with episode 4 of UFO Narrative. Thanks for watching.